Good morning, everyone. My name is Anne Greenwood. I'm the Education and Training Lead for Population Data BC, and I'd like to welcome you to our webinar series this morning on the power of population data science. It's my pleasure to introduce our presenters for today, Kim McGrail and Karina Jones, and they will be starting off our webinar series with their presentation on the power of population data science, and are you a population data scientist? Just by way of an introduction, Dr. Karina Jones is an associate professor of the health informatics at Swansea University, where she is the academic lead for information governance and public engagement to ensure data protection and maximize socially acceptable data utility across the various Swansea University-based data-intensive linkage initiatives. And these include the SAIL Databank Administrative Data Research Centre at Wales, the FAR Centre, and recently awarded the DRUC collaboration between Swansea University and Queen's University at Belfast. Karina leads the Active Innovation Governance Working Group of the FAR Institute, which works collaboratively to advise and influence the developing data governance landscape to promote the safe reuse of data. She leads an IG research program, including work to inform cross-center research and how emerging data types such as genetic data can be used in conjunction with health record data. And this includes a program of public engagement, which Karina enjoys working with the public on the use of anonymized data for research. Should also mention that Karina is the editor-in-chief of the International Journal of Population Data Science, who are partners in this initiative for the webinar series. Kim McGrail is an associate professor at the University of British Columbia for in the School of Population and Public Health and the Centre for Health Services and Policy Research. She's also the scientific director of Population Data BC and the data director for BC Academic Health Sciences Network. Her research interests on quantitative policy evaluation, aging, and the use of cost of health care services, learning health systems, and all aspects of population data science. She conducts research in partnership with clinicians, policymakers, and the public. Kim is a founding member of the International Population Data Linkage Network, in which you've probably seen was just delivered in Banff, BC in September, and founding deputy editor of the International Journal of Population Data Science. So Kim and Karina work very closely together on these initiatives. She was a 2009 and 10 Commonwealth Fund Harkness Associate in Healthcare Policy and Practice, a 2016 recipient of the Gordon Mackenzie Prize for Excellence in Teaching, and the 2017 recipient of a UBC Award for Excellence in Clinical or Applied Research. So you're in good company with our presenters this morning. They have lots to offer in terms of knowledge and breadth of scope of information related to population data science. We're going to begin the webinar with Karina, and just a note as we move along that if you have questions or comments, you can use the chat function on the GoToWebinar panel that you should see on your screen. If you're having any difficulty doing that, you can also send me an email directly to ann.greenwood@popdata.bc.ca, which you would have seen this morning, and I'd be happy to address those questions orally as well. And without further ado, I'll pass it over to you, Karina.
Thank you very much, Anne. And hello, everyone. It's great to be delivering this first webinar in association with the journal IJPDS. And thank you very much, Anne, for arranging this. I know that PopData BC has a series of webinars, but this is the first one that we're doing in association with the journal. So we thought it would be a fitting start to begin with the population data science, because the journal itself is the International Journal of Population Data Science. And Kim and I will be delivering part of this webinar. We'll be alternating between the two of us, which we hope will work really smoothly. So we'll see how we go. So really, to begin then, I'll start with an overview of why population data science, who does it involve, how did it come about, what is population data science, what are the next steps, and we'll also be talking a little bit about the journal as well. So beginning with the why, and we thought we'd begin with a little friend of ours, Snoopy, who's probably very familiar to you. He's obviously looking puzzled, Snoopy, because he's thinking to himself, well, what am I doing here, and what is the meaning of life? But what we've got here, which you may be able to see, are 3 pictures of the different cities that the recent IPDLN conferences were held in. Starting off in Vancouver, that was where the conversations about whether or not we should define a new field began. And it really arose because people were finding that when they come to the IPDLN conference, they would feel very much at home, and that it would be very much a favourite conference. And I can honestly say, having just come back from the Banff conference, it felt like being part of a really nice family. It was a lovely, lovely conference, and I really enjoyed it. And that was something that people have been finding now over the recent years with these biennial conferences, is that people would come to the conference, make new friends and new networks, and then we'd all disappear off into our own little pockets, our own countries spread out across the world, really. So we started to think about us as a collective, as the IPDLN network really then, and also beyond that, of being in a way a community, even though we're very spread out. And we often find ourselves we come from particular disciplines, but there is more going on than that binds us together, really. So, you know, we may have lots of epidemiologists and statisticians or clinicians and analysts, but there is something more when we start looking at data linkage work. So we started to think about it then as to whether it would be worth defining something, not a discipline as such, but broader than that, some sort of field that would create an umbrella really to represent all the people and the initiatives that go together for data intensive or data linkage research, however we think of that. So we moved on to thinking then about, well, who does this actually involve? And really, what we've got there's a nice picture of people having a lovely, happy time in the conference. And we realised that it's about all the people represented in the IPDLN, in the network across the world, but it's also more than that, because there are many people who are not necessarily members of that network, or who are new to the network, or who haven't come to find out about the network yet. And also, a population data scientist wouldn't be, there wouldn't be one person who would have all the knowledge that is embodied in population data science. You could say that obviously of physics, let's say, for example, but it's probably a little clearer in people's minds what we mean when we say a physicist. You've got to deal with certain things. But a population data scientist, it's much more of a broader perspective, so it's more of a field. And really, that's because this is about enterprise development. Data linkage enterprises or units are in some ways like mini organizations. It's not just a single thing, it's a big agglomeration of different functions going on in order to make it happen. Because some people in population data science might be the ones that develop and implement infrastructure or methodologies to work with data, analytical tools for managing or linking or integrating the data. Other people's efforts will be going into ensuring the access is secure, perhaps the environment around the data is secure, and then others focus on the legal and ethical obligations, societal implications, working with the public. And then on the other side then, in a way, you've got the people who would work with that infrastructure and with the data in order to produce outcome-based research. And those all really go together hand in hand. So we see population data science as including people from all sorts of different disciplines, such as computer and information sciences, statistics, epidemiology, public health, other clinical disciplines, pharmacy, social welfare, information governance, ethics and law, geographic elements, economics, social scientists, public engagement, capacity building, knowledge translation. all sorts of different disciplines to come together, because it's too big an entity to be just peopled by a single discipline. It's such a big enterprise that it needs all this different sort of input to make it work. So how did we arise at population data science? Well, it started off in St Andrews in 2015, and there was an initial workshop there with about 35 people, and a few ideas were sort of shared around. And what happened was a suggestion came up of population data science, and that was the one that really struck a chord compared to some of the others. And at that point, Kim carried out a rapid literature review to look at, well, what are the definitions of existing fields, to see whether they encompass what we are and this work area that we cover as a breadth, really. And that led to a short working paper at the end of 2015, which is where Kim and I joined forces then and became the core team that worked on developing further population data science. So then in February 2016, I ran a local workshop, and that was with people within our own data science building, which is the SAIL data bank and related initiatives there. So we have got that breadth of people from different disciplines there. And I gathered them all together in a room and asked them if they would give me a concise definition of how they would describe their work, without preempting to them that this is likely to be called population data science. And I suggested they did that either as 30 words or less, or if they felt like being creative, I suggested they did it in the form of a haiku. And the reason for doing it in such a concise way was so that people would really, really home in on what are the key characteristics of their area of work. And a haiku, as you probably know, is a short Japanese poem. They tend to be beautiful and lyrical about the landscape. So I was hoping people would write something beautiful and lyrical about their work. And we came up with some lovely ones. You can see a selection of 4 here. One, for example, was population data science turns population data into information as if by magic. So the way it works, you've got 5 syllables, 7 syllables, 5 syllables, and that's all you can have. And another one, let's use big data for broad public benefit, population-wide. And pop data science turns data into knowledge, informs policy, and working hand in hand, interaction, common purpose, unifying theme. And so from that pilot workshop, where we had that as the background, really, we planned a second international workshop, and that was in the IPDLN conference in Swansea in 2016. And in order to prepare for that, what we did was we produced some preliminary materials, shared it with all our colleagues in the IPDLN, and then wanted to see who would want to interact with us. And quite a lot of people responded, sent some ideas. We asked them for pros and cons of naming a new field, what they think the advantages would be, where they think the risks would be. And again, they were also asked if they would like to write haikus as well. And we ran it as a little competition and gave prizes in the workshop. And then from that workshop, where there was a really, really good discussion, we took the findings, came to a consensus definition, which I'll show you a little later, and then invited all the membership again to communicate and see if they wanted to contribute. And it was great because about 25 people worked very closely with us through quite some major iterations over about 18 months. And then finally we produced a position paper which was published in the journal in IJPDS in 2018. And so we were really pleased because that was such a spread of people from across different countries, and we got all sorts of different input and perspectives there, and were still able to come to a consensus and come up with a position statement for how we see this field, how we see it in comparison with other similar fields, and what the next steps in the direction would be, which we'll move on to in a little while. So in terms of how the main fields compared, The sort of front runners that compared closely to population data science were data science and informatics. And the little box at the top there has got some of the features of the different fields: data science, informatics, and population data science. But what we did then was we pulled out, well, how would they be defined? Looking at the literature, the review that Kim did, well, data science is quite a general field. It's common to many disciplines, and the data are not necessarily about people. It's a sort of big data field, really, where it may be traffic, meteorological data, air traffic data. All of that can generate big data that may not relate to actual individual level data about people. It's private and public sector, and the infrastructure that creates that enterprise is not really the primary focus. Then informatics, and particularly health informatics, is about technology-based solutions, perhaps, let's say, to a health problem. It can be related to e-health or medical devices, that sort of thing. And so the focus is more on technical implementation and infrastructure, with that primary focus on the systems and the providers, but not necessarily primarily on the data. It's more on the informatics systems and devices. So we then looked and thought, well, yes, from everything we've looked at in the literature review, our own research, and in talking to people in different forums, we could see that population data science was a distinct thing, because its focus is on people, it's on the systems that create the infrastructures to have population level insights. So it's about integrating data from different sources, different types of data, all with a focus on public good, informed by public engagement, and the important elements around the legal and ethical and privacy norms in using person-based data. So in a way, population data science is more about people than data science, and it's more about data than informatics. So we felt it was distinct enough, and we moved forward on that. So in terms of the key characteristics and whether you would want to think, well, is a piece of work, is an enterprise about population data science? What we looked at was, well, there's these 4 questions. Is the focus on people? For population data science, the focus is on people, the systems, and population level insights. Do the data come from multiple sources? So it's not just about, say, just using primary care data, or just using hospital data, or just education data. The primary objective in population data science is linking or integrating data from these different places. And what is the primary aim of the research? It needs to have public value, potential for positive impact, and is there a focus on that infrastructure, which is very key in terms of creating safe research environments, whatever the model is, whether they're distributed or repository, however the setup is made, that the infrastructure is key, the analytical platforms, the methodologies around it, and the legal and ethical and privacy norms, along with public expectations for social acceptability. So population data science covers all these aspects altogether. So in terms of what is population data science, we came up with a very short definition, which is population data science, the science of data about people. So it's population data science, the science of population data, rather than population data science, if you see what I mean. It's not population data science, it's population data science, the science of data about people. And then we created a slightly longer definition, which is the one you may have seen if you've seen the paper, which says that population data science is a multidisciplinary field aimed at obtaining population level insights with public value by organising, linking, or otherwise integrating and analysing data pertaining to individuals across the spectrum of their lives and interests, so health, social, economic, biological, environmental, so all sorts of data, not limited to health, So all sorts of administrative data, can also incorporate survey data. And as Anne mentioned when she introduced me, things like genetic data, possibly integrating things, information from social media at some point. Some organizations do. So there's all sorts of different data being integrated together to create as rich a data resource as possible, and surrounding it in that privacy by design which must be in place, and which requires all the people, all yourselves out there and more from all these different disciplines, all essential in order to make it happen. So I'm going to pass over to Kim now to tell you a bit more, and then Kim will pass back to me to talk about the journal a little later on.
Great, thanks, Karina. So what I'm going to do is go into a little bit more depth on the characteristics of population data science that Karina's already outlined, just to give a bit more depth of and some examples of what we were thinking about in all of this. So I'm going to do this by going through the 4 key characteristics that Karina really has already identified that we think are fundamental to this definition of population data science. So one of these, the first is that data use for positive impact on individuals and populations. So this really is a key thing here. Population data science could be done by the public sector, by the private sector, by a combination. It could use data coming from individuals, again, from the private or public sector, but fundamentally, population data science has to have a public good or some public value that comes from it. And this does not mean that it has to be exclusively public value, because we all, I think, understand, and this is based on a lot of public engagement work that was done in Scotland in preparation for the Scottish Health Information Programme, and some other places around the world. We're starting to do a bit more of this in Canada as well. And what the public really consistently says is it's fine for there to be some private interest in what's done with data, but there should be public interest. There must be public interest as well. So that is not exclusive, but has to be there. And then the other thing about we believe in the data use for positive impact on individuals and populations is that that means that there has to be a commitment to true public engagement. And this is both the practice of public engagement. It's also about moving that science of public engagement forward. And I include here just this reference to the IJP2 framework for anybody who is already familiar with this. If we think about different levels of public impact or public engagement, it can go anywhere from informing, that's just communication messages going out, all the way up to actually including people in the development of policies, rules around data use and so on. Applied to this context, that's where we think a lot of this is quite important. But there is a lot of science development that still needs to be done in that area. So one of the second characteristic really is bringing together and analyzing data from multiple sources. So we're really talking here mainly about secondary use of data, and that is the idea that the data that we're talking about already exist in some form, and what we're doing is providing a venue, a compilation, a technical resource, a way to take those data and analyze them for a secondary purpose. So it's trying to make the best that we can out of the sunk cost of data collection, ensure that we can, as one of my colleagues says, wring every bit of information we possibly can from the data, since we've already put burden on systems and people to collect them, then we need to be able to use them appropriately. So that's here. And then, of course, we start from a bedrock or a backbone of administrative data. So these are our data that are collected in the distribution or use of services, or as requests for payment from people who are providing those services in public sector. And a lot of this really started with healthcare data, but it's, as Karina has already mentioned, it's moved on from that. And this is where we see a lot of researcher ambitions into the future, is that we're going to want to have access to data from different sources that have different types, that have a complexity themselves because it's natural. There's free text fields and we need to do natural language processing, or they're really, really large data sets like genomics that need a whole different sort of analytic approach to this. So all of those, and I guess the way we think about this is, maybe a lot of us think about big data as being an overused term these days. I think we're focusing more on complex and linked data. So they may be big in size, they may not be big in size, but there's a complexity bringing different data sets together, and that's what we're focused on. And this again has both a scientific development component in the sense of we need to be able to link data. So there's a whole world of development in the science of, for example, privacy preserving record linkage, but there's also a lot to be done in the analytics space, including things like visual analytics, but also trying to take advantage of the longitudinal nature of many of these data sets. So the third characteristic here is identifying population level insights. And this really is about a focus on of really wanting to make sure that we're paying attention to the people that are in there, and again, just trying to focus on the fact that this is about individuals. And it's really important to remember, too, that we're talking about it at multiple scales. So while we're talking about population level, that doesn't necessarily mean that we're always talking about a country's population or a state or province's population. This could be a community, a vulnerable population group. It could be, and it can function at many scales, from a small number of people to a very large number of people. But the focus really is on collections of individuals. And really, we want to be able to find insights through this complex data linkage, so that we actually understand biological, social, and environmental experiences, all of the things that that shape our individual and collective health and well-being. So this could be the health or well-being of communities, or I mean, there's any number of questions that one might ask. And as Karina really already went over, I think in some detail, we're talking about a large number of disciplines that need to be involved in this. And what I like to say is this is really about population data science being a team sport, and really requiring us to work in an interdisciplinary way if we want to get all that we can out of the possibilities that these data provide. And then the fourth area is the technical and policy infrastructure that we need in order to put all of these things in place and make everything happen. And this really is a fundamental, important piece of what we're talking about in population data science, because, I mean, I think anybody who's listening to this will know that the world of data, we as researchers know that what we're doing has public value, or has been assessed to have public value, but there's an awful lot of maybe bad, slightly less positive things that could be done with data. And so it's really important to make sure that if we have the benefit and the privilege of using these data, that we're doing so in a safe, privacy sensitive, and ethical way. So this is really about the function of what I refer to as socio-technical systems. And so this includes the technology, computer infrastructure, and so on. But it's really, we put a lot of emphasis on the socio side of that. So the ethical and legal frameworks, making sure we have really strong governance processes, secure environments for research analysis, and making sure that those are up to date, that we are providing people with appropriate metadata and good quality data so that they can use data appropriately, and not extend the data beyond what they really are able to address. So again, that has both a science component as well as just an infrastructure providing component. We really view these as ensuring that we're operating with best practices. And of course, the world of data is changing very rapidly. So that means that population data science is going to have to do a lot of work to stay caught up. So if we think about what next steps might mean? This is where in the paper we really talk about the beginnings of a research agenda that come from the process of defining this field and defining the characteristics that we really think are the kind of basis for the field, and the importance of creating this separate from other things that we've been talking about, like data science more generically, or informatics. And really, again, it comes back to this idea of population level insights. We know that we need multidisciplinary work, the team sport idea. We know that in terms of linking, we need to advance the science of linkage itself, create new tools. We have to pay a lot of attention to training, both in students as they're actually learning about population data science and related disciplines, or through related disciplines, but we also need to be able to provide people with training who are already working in this field, because frankly, a lot of what we want to do in the future with data, the people who are already working in this area, including myself, really don't have all the tools at our disposal, or all the skills we might need for the kind of advances that we really can make with what's available. We do, I think, want to underline and restate our commitment to public and stakeholder engagement, but really more than that, the public involvement in what we're doing. There's a lot of groups across the country who have made a commitment to including public voice in the policy setting process around data access governance, or information governance. And there is, in fact, going to be a paper forthcoming that expresses a consensus statement on commitments to public involvement for data intensive science, which will be a nice companion to this population data science paper. And then, of course, we want to make a commitment to ethical and rigorous science within the legal frameworks that exist in all of our jurisdictions, which have a lot of similarities, but some differences too. And again, these are going to evolve, and we need to evolve with them, which creates a lot of opportunity for ongoing research, implementation, and a lot of reason for us. We think it's really part of the motivation is defining a field is not meant to be a purely academic exercise. We define a field because we think that there's reason for us all to be working together and to make sure that we have some kind of common language and voice for understanding why it is that collective response and collective impact are really important in this area. So in terms of what we see as next steps, before I hand it back to Karina to talk about the journal, like I've said, we think that there's a lot of science to be developed. There's a lot of reason for us to be working together. And we hope that the paper, the position statement paper, really just helps to set a starting point. We would not profess to think that we have everything right for all time. We hope that people will feel really invited into the conversation, and we'll have things to add that will help to shape this field as it goes forward. And we really do want it to be inclusive and inviting to everybody. We really think that there may be some role for advocacy in the sense of, if you think back to Karina and her opening comments about us kind of thinking after conferences, why is it that we're so interested in working together? What draws us together? And part of it is because we recognize that we have a lot to learn from each other, and that when we're facing struggles within our local environments, because we want to do some kind of new research that's not currently allowed, or there isn't a pathway for it, that we can borrow from each other, learn from each other. And in that sense, it's sort of self-help group, but a larger sense of advocacy about what the best practices are in these areas, because they are going to change. And it is really potentially fraught with a lot of ethical issues. And of course, we'd love for you to use, comment on, cite the paper. That will help the journal itself, but it's really going to help the field as well. But with that, I'll turn it back to Karina for more about the journal.
Okay, thank you very much, Kim. So I'll move on to talk a bit about IJPDS and how that came about. So in terms of background and rationale for the journal, why now, why IJPDS? Well, it really comes back to the same sort of reasoning around the development of population data science. It's that growing community of professionals working with the data across the world, and some of us being perhaps in the disciplines that are smaller numbers of people within each enterprise. Perhaps, for example, within an enterprise, you may have a number of analysts, but perhaps the people who work on ethics and privacy are in smaller numbers. So we really do need that, as Kim was saying, that being able to share experiences and learn from each other. So that was something we felt was really important. Whether we're working in a small group or a big group, that cross-fertilization is always valuable. And then you have some enterprises are long established, some are in consolidation, some are brand new, some are yet to be set up, and there's an awful lot of learning we can do from each other with all these different sorts of disciplines. And something else that was very clear was that often with maybe a paper that's focused in a particular research area, that might be not too difficult to find a suitable journal within that subject area. But for a lot of work that goes on in these enterprises, it can be difficult to find a suitable journal to publish the works. And it was actually looking for a journal to publish the abstracts from the 2016 conference that led to the idea of us having our own journal, because we were looking for somewhere, because Swansea hosted the 2016 conference, and we started to think about, well, which journal would be able to publish the proceedings from the conference. But by the time we started thinking about that, it might have been a little late to get another journal interested, and it was just a matter of, well, why don't we think about having our own journal? And it progressed from there, really. So in a way, it's back to that little picture of Snoopy and his existential, why am I here? Who am I? Where am I going? Who do I belong to really build on the idea of the IPDLN, build on the idea of this field of population data science, and create a home for the work that arises from all these enterprises in population data science. And really the definition here is just the same as we had. So the scope really of the journal is to see broader than health, spanning different disciplines, and encompassing everything about the science of data about people. So in terms of the scope of the journal, some of you may have already looked at it. You're very welcome. It's just IJPDS.org. We've been running now for 18 months. It's an electronic open access peer-reviewed journal, and we publish articles on all aspects of research, methodology, etc. We're not limited in just to research articles. I know some journals are tighter than others in terms of their scope, but we recognise that because the work of population data science includes that infrastructure development, the privacy, the public engagement, the methodological developments in order to work with the data, we needed to have a scope that allows those pieces of work to be published, because otherwise we wouldn't really be serving you as the community. So we are very open to publishing different types of articles. So protocol papers, for example, as long as there's a methodological focus, case studies, features on a particular topic, definitely methodological developments, working papers, cohort development papers, how people have put a big cohort data set together, whether it's longitudinal, whether it's cross-sectional, and linking different data sets together. How was that done? What was the work that went into doing that? Review articles, similar to other journals, but perhaps reviewing why the choice of a particular model was made, why this infrastructure model, why that privacy model, why that access model, for example. So not a review on, let's say, something discipline specific about diabetes or heart condition or something like that, but this would be the review of, well, how did you arrive at setting up the way you have, and what were the lessons you learned from that? So those are broader topics that we're very keen to cover, as well as the more standard research article. And I mean, there's lots of guidance on the site for authors, but it's always worth getting in touch with us, because if you've got an article that you think doesn't fit the standard IMRAD type format, where it's a structured abstract and introduction, methods, results, discussion, talk to us about it, because some things don't fit. It's not one size fits all. So we see the journal then as a unique vehicle for publishing this broader range of articles by encompassing all these different types. And it was very much inspired by the IPDLN, and we placed great importance on the viewpoints of the network members. We recently carried out a survey to get network members' views on different ideas for the future of the journal, and I'll touch on a little of that in a second. So in terms of who's who and what's what, I'm the founding editor-in-chief and Kim is the deputy editor, so we work very closely together on journal development. It's hosted at Swansea University, so we have what we think of as a journal management team, where we have people who look after the marketing and communications, so any e-shots you see, the design, even the design of the slides. If they've got a logo on, then they were designed by our graphic designer. And we have a marketing manager and we have a journal manager who does all the preparation and the production work. We set up an international editorial board because we wanted to be inclusive, to represent all these different countries with the different enterprises and the breadth of expertise that goes into population data science. And we have, I think there are about 60 people on our peer review database, but after the Banff conference, I think there may well be a few more, because we had Stephanie Lee was there at the stand and she was asking people who attended the conference whether they'd like to sign up to be a peer reviewer. And if anyone listening would like to be a peer reviewer, please get in touch with us. You can contact us through the journal and let us know if you feel you'd like to contribute in that way. So far, we've published 17 articles in what we call Band A, so that's a research article, and 1 methodology article, 1 report, and we've published 4 sets of conference proceedings, so the IPDLN twice, and an administrative data research forum conference in the US, and an administrative data research network conference in the UK. We've just published a special issue on cross-centre working. We've published the first 3 articles in that issue, and we have another 6 to add, but we're not actually going to close that. So if anyone has another article on cross-centre working, or an article falls into that category, we can just add it there. And that just shows you there we have 14 more articles in review. And if you look on the author guidelines on the website, it gives you the information on what the current fees are, the article processing fees. We're currently running a 1/3 discount until the end of 2018. So I think it's $9.97 in UK currency to publish a research article, and the others are less. So, but have a look at the author guidelines, and if you have any queries, please contact through the journal. It'll come through to myself or to Kim anyway. And in terms of marketing and communications, we have a very dedicated team looking at that, which is great. It's something we're careful and we tread carefully about, because I expect you're like us in that you probably find in your inbox all sorts of weird, wonderful requests from strange journals, from all sorts of places that want you to submit an article by tomorrow, and all sorts of things being asked in disciplines completely out of your field. I know I get all sorts. I even get them. They're not even addressed to me. They'll be addressed personally, but not to me. They'll be addressed to someone else. So we're cautious not to overdo marketing, but we also do want to make sure that we've got a proper presence. So we're keen to send out information, but not to overload people. We encourage people who've submitted articles before to come back, and we want to extend our range of author services. For example, if someone has an abstract, they want to run it past us, that's absolutely fine. We're also willing, as I mentioned, to give a little bit of guidance, just carefully, not to do anything inappropriate, but just to say, oh, this would be better in perhaps that structure, or I'd advise you in this direction, but just to be careful not to do anything inappropriate there and help people too much, if you know what I mean. But we do want to be helpful. We're definitely looking to gain our impact factor, and we're working very much towards that and being indexed with PubMed and such like. So I mentioned the survey, and just briefly touch on that. We asked people what they would think would be the most important topic if we were going to have a new special issue. And what came out as a really clear front runner was methodology. So articles about methodology, even to the point that it was broken down in these different areas: record linkage, analysis methods, assessing data quality, and novel linkage and emerging data types. And the second rank was to have something on privacy and ethics, and thirdly was quite a broad topic which had lots of subheadings, but we could just cover it as outcome-based research. So we're planning to put out a call for methodology, and it probably wouldn't be a call that would close. We may put a deadline for an ideal point at which we could then start to put the issue out there, but we would allow others then to come in and be added to that issue as well, because it does seem to be such a popular one and such a big area of work. And that final slide I've got there is just to show the ways in which the journal has become involved with professional organisations. We're included in the Directory of Open Access Journals, Crossref, and the Academy of Learned Professional Society Publishers, and various others. And we very much hope that it won't be too long before we have an impact factor. And if you have any questions, please get in touch. If you go to IJPDS.org, which the contact is on that slide there, it'll come through to us anyway. And I'll pass back to Kim now, who's just going to finish off this webinar.
You can see the connection between the journal and the International Population Data Linkage Network all throughout this conversation. And so we just want to make a pitch for that network. The next conference, the directors of the network are moving to Australia, and the next conference is going to be in 2020 in Adelaide, which is in South Australia. So please mark your calendars and get involved, and we'd love for you to join the community. And I think with that, we're very happy to answer any questions that anybody might have.
Thanks very much, Karina and Kim, for the great presentation. As Kim mentioned, we have some time now for just open questions. If you'd like to use the chat function on the GoToWebinar panel, or if you prefer to send me an email directly, I am also monitoring my email. There is one question just about PopData's Data Scout access, and the fact that it's available only to academics right now, and that people in the BC government and perhaps the public would enjoy the opportunity to have access to that in the future. I don't know, Kim, if you can speak to that, or if it's something that we could maybe just follow up by email, but I'll pass it over to you.
I think that's an interesting question and has some relevance everywhere. Just so people know, Data Scout is just the BC name for a way of getting some insight into whether data systems that are available for research actually have the ability to answer the questions you might be interested in. So is there enough of a population with some kind of experience, whether it's a healthcare experience or social education? So it's a way of looking at data for feasibility. I think that there's a lot of interest internationally in this sort of making sure that data are findable and accessible, and that we know enough about what data say to help develop research questions. But there's also a potential utility of these tools for just even having some basic understanding of, how many people fit criterion X. And so I don't know where the Data Scout piece is going to go in BC, but I suspect over the next few years we'll see lots of development that will make some basic pieces of information more readily available to people, including, I hope, the public.